Welcome to Larry's Library. First Tuesday of every month, I do a new top 10. And today, I'm doing something a little bit different because it's not really comic related, maybe a little bit. This is my top 10 favorite fantasy films of all time. Now, as always, I got to say it's subject to change because, well, I'm always watching new content and my opinions change from day to day. So if you ask me what are my top 10 favorite fantasy films of all time, a week from now, it very well could be different. And it's also possible that I've forgotten some great ones. So I'm sure some people are going to put theirs in the comments, and then I'm going to go, yo, man, I forgot all about this or that, and then it just changes the whole order. But as of right now, this is what I've cooked up. Now, first, let me set the rules. What I mean by fantasy film, at least in this top 10, is I'm talking about pre-firearms setting. I'm really talking about more sword and sorcery films than I am fantasy films. I mean, sword and sorcery is a subgenre to me of fantasy films. But typically, what I'm talking about is, like I said, pre-firearms, a world setting where it's roughly equivalent to our own Middle Ages, the medieval times. So pre-firearms, but steel era, swords, crossbows, that sort of thing. And for it to be fantasy film, of course, magic has to be real. So that is the other prerequisite because that would let out some of the sword and sandal epics like Ben-Hur wouldn't qualify, because there's no magic, or at least not magic in the sense that I'm talking about here, sorcery. So I'm gonna just get right into it. At number 10, we have a film that actually violates some of the rules I just laid out. But hold on. Because this one is not set in a medieval world. It's actually the era before that, ancient times, more like the Greco-Roman era. But it fits all the other criteria for sure, because there's certainly swords, and there's certainly sorcery, and monsters, and now all that sort of thing. And I'm talking about Jason and the Argonauts. This came out in 1963, directed by Don Chaffee. I believe that's how you pronounce it. But the real star of Jason and the Argonauts, if you haven't seen it, you definitely should check it out, are the creature effects, because this is by the master Ray Harryhausen, and it's great. If you've never seen Ray Harryhausen effects before, you really got to watch this. I mean, it's stop motion animation is what it is. He takes models and moves them a little bit, one frame at a time, and the results are pretty spectacular. Wholly different than the CGI we're used to today. A different look, different feel, but it's very fun in and of itself. So yeah, check out Jason and the Argonauts if you haven't seen this. I've never seen this at a theater. Of course, I'm not that old, but I have seen it on TV. The first time I seen it was with my dad on late night TV, I'm quite sure. But yeah, it's a treat. Probably one of my earliest exposures to this kind of thing was with Jason and the Argonauts, and I've never forgotten it. So number 9 is Dragon Slayer. Now, this has nothing to do with the video game or the animated film. This is the Dragon Slayer from 1981. And it is kind of a dark fantasy. It's in the Dark Ages. I just love it. It was so good. This was directed by Matthew Robbins. Like I said, it came out in 1981. I did see that one at the theater, and I loved it. And it's about a sort of a sorcerer's apprentice who ends up slaying a dragon and saving a village, or trying to, a kingdom, if you will. The dragon effects, I remember being quite good. I haven't seen this in many years, so I'm not sure how they'll hold up, but I remember it being really something, when I seen it at least. I have seen it on DVD years after the release, but I haven't seen it in probably a good 15, 20 years at this point. But that makes number 9 on this list. At number 8, I have the second Conan film starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. And this one is Conan the Destroyer. It came out in 1984, directed by Richard Fleischer. Now, an odd thing about this one is the screenplay was by Roy Thomas and Jerry Conway of the comic books. So you would think this would be a can't miss, right? Well, it misses in several areas. This one is almost a guilty pleasure for me because it's just not as good as the first film in numerous ways. The tone is completely different. I mean, they were going for more of a comical adventure more lighthearted, less brooding, less dark than the first film, and they sort of succeed. But the creature effects are a little lacking. The one battle he has with a monster in this mirrored funhouse type situation, the monster is not very convincing, unfortunately. But it does have a great cast. I mean, you have Grace Jones is a warrior in it, and she's fierce and really fun to watch. She's crazy in this. So that's a highlight. Wilt Chamberlain is one of the bad guys, and he does pretty good. It's fun. And the beautiful Olivia Dabo is the princess in this. So that's there's it's got a good cast. The story's pretty good, but the tone is just it didn't really do it for me. I mean it convinced me it's Conan. I mean it's Schwarzenegger. He's back in it. He looks great. But yeah, this was a bit of a miss in many ways to me. It's a letdown after that first film, but it's okay. I mean it's good enough. I liked it enough. It made number 8 for sure. So there's that. At number 7, I've got the Hobbit trilogy. Now I'm talking about the 3 films by Peter Jackson. They came out between 2012 and 2014. What can I say about this that hasn't already been said? This is another one that it has moments of greatness and a lot of moments of joy, but overall it was quite a letdown. I didn't like what he was doing with the frame rate, the 60 frames per second. I don't like that. To me, it just doesn't look cinematic. I don't know any other way of saying it. I'm an old school guy there. I prefer 24 frames per second. So, I don't need anything else for my movies. But yeah, so I wasn't impressed with that. And the CG has been talked about ad nauseum by many, many other reviewers, and I don't need to rehash that. But it's not great. It's too much. I would have liked more practical effects and less CGI. And then what can you say about why did we have 3 movies to tell the story of The Hobbit? The Hobbit is one of my favorite books of all time. I mean, it's a self-contained story. It's 300 pages? It's not that big. We don't need 3 films for this. And some of the choices he made, I'm still scratching my head at years later. I'm like, well, you left this out, but you added all this stuff that didn't happen. I mean, if you're going to start cutting stuff out of a book, I can understand for time, right? But then you're going to add in all this other stuff that you're just fabricating from whole cloth. I mean, why? There was enough material there. You didn't have to add anything new. So yeah, this was a disappointment. But obviously I liked it. I liked the acting in it. The acting was fantastic from everyone. The casting was good. Got no problem with any of that. And I did like it, or it wouldn't be in my top 10. But that's why it's down here at number 7, because it had a lot of a lot of problems in my mind. It could have been great, and instead it's only really good. So that's where I stand with the Hobbit Peter Jackson films. And, I think it could have been a good 2.5, 3-hour movie, a single movie, and it could have been great. Now, moving on up, number 6 in my top 10 favorite fantasy films is Legend. Now, this is from 1985, directed by the awesome Ridley Scott. This had an incredible cast. You had the ethereal Mia Sara was the star as far as I'm concerned, and lots of other guys, I'm sure, back then. But yeah, I loved it. The incredible Tim Curry is the big bad in this. The effects are awesome. Now, again, I haven't seen this in quite a while, so I'm not sure how good it holds up. But I remember being just completely blown away by this at the theater, and I've seen it later, multiple times on DVD. It's a great one. If you haven't seen Legend, you got to see it. If I remember right, the soundtrack is by Tangerine Dream, and it's really good too. Fantastic music. Now, right at the halfway point at number 5 is just a truly great film as far as I'm concerned, and that is Lady Hawk, another film from the same year, 1985. A lot of good stuff in that year. And this was directed by Richard Donner. Incredible, just awesome cast. Rutger Hauer, Michelle Pfeiffer, Matthew Broderick. I mean, how can those 3 miss? Well, they can't, as far as I'm concerned. This was great. Here we have Rutger Hauer, for me, as sort of a departure because you've got him playing a good guy, and I'm used to him being, I guess, more of a bad guy than a good guy, like his character in Blade Runner. It's awesome. But yeah, so Rutger Hauer is a knight and awesome black armor, huge black stallion, really good stuff. And Michelle Pfeiffer is his love. And here's the problem: they're cursed, and I think it's just a fantastic plot device here. She turns into a hawk during the day. This is the curse, and he turns into a wolf at night, so they can never be together as humans. You know, that is the curse put upon him by this evil bishop, and I can't remember why he had a beef with him, but he cursed him that way. And yeah, it's great. And the movie is about them struggling to be together and how they can break this curse. You know, Matthew Broderick plays this thief who ends up helping them. Just great stuff throughout. Yeah, and it's kind of unusual too because you see some stuff that you just don't really see that often. Like for one, Rutger Hauer's a hero. He's a knight. And he wields this huge two-handed sword. It's awesome. And he also uses a crossbow, which is another kind of a odd thing. You don't see the hero wielding a crossbow too much. I mean, Daryl Dixon in Walking Dead, of course, but I'm talking about in a sword and sorcery film. Yeah, it's good stuff. One thing that was kind of controversial about Lady Hawk when it came out, and I guess maybe it still is the soundtrack doesn't have your typical medieval style music. Instead, it has sort of a rock soundtrack, and I think Alan Parsons is one of the co-producers of the music on this. And so it's like got rock guitars and that sort of thing throughout it. More contemporary sounding music in a medieval fantasy. So a lot of people found that really jarring and they didn't like it. I really enjoyed it. I mean, at first I was like, ooh, that's a strange choice, but but it worked. Oddly enough, it worked. And yeah, I love this film. And it is beautifully shot too. The cinematography in this is just gorgeous. Yeah, if you haven't seen this, check it out ASAP. You're going to love it if you love, medieval fantasies. At number 4, I've got Excalibur. Now, this one came out in 1981, directed by John Boorman. And it is another really unique film because it is basically the story of King Arthur done in a really dark adult way. I mean, this was rated R, and I remember when I seen this at the theater, me and a couple of my buddies went, and I don't know how old I was in 1981. Let's see. About 12, 13 years old, something like that. And my buddy's dad drove us to the theater. And I'm not sure he realized it was R because once he seen it was R on the marquee, he wasn't going to go in with us. He was going to drop us off. So he had to go up there and buy the tickets for us. And then he just said, he took us aside after he got the tickets and he said, now, boys, you might see some boobies, but just keep that to yourself. And I'll be back in a couple hours to get you. And he got in his truck and left, and we went in there and watched Excalibur. And we seen a little bit more than boobies, but it was a great film. It really was. The music is just incredible. Awesome soundtrack. I will never forget that opening kind of sound. Maybe I'll find a clip of it and put it right here. Yeah, the soundtrack is awesome, and I will never forget that theme. But yeah, in this, you have all of Arthur's knights are in shiny plate mail, but they are all kinds of bloody battles, really violent battles, and you have this dark magic going on. And Merlin, I forget the actor that played Merlin, but he has this weird skull cap thing, this stainless skull cap thing he wears. Very odd looking, but yeah, it's just a powerful film. I think it's underrated too because I hardly ever hear anyone mention Excalibur, but I love this thing. Loved it. Really good effects too, and the sword is beautiful. So yeah, this is a great one. Now at number 3 in my top fantasy films of all time is Conan the Barbarian. The first film came out in 1982, directed by the awesome John Milius. And it is a dark, brooding, adult, hyper-violent depiction of Robert E. Howard's Conan. And it's fairly faithful. I mean, he did take a few liberties. There's some Eastern influences here that were not present in Robert E. Howard's Conan. But it works. The whole thing works. Glorious soundtrack by Basil Polidorus. Really good music. The theme is awesome. I mean, once you hear it, you can't get it out of your head. It's another one of those. Great cast. Arnold Schwarzenegger does a pretty good job here. And yeah, I can't complain. This, for a lot of people, I mean, I was familiar with the character before the film, quite a few years before the film. But for a lot of people, when they think of Conan, this is what they think of. They think of the first Arnold Schwarzenegger film. And it's a great one. The swords are all very authentic looking and beautiful. Beautiful sword designs throughout. Just gorgeous. Yeah. Thulsa Doom, played here by James Earl Jones, is unforgettable. Fantastic depiction. Very, very powerful story. I loved it, and I will always love this one. Yeah. Yeah. If you haven't seen the first Conan film, oh, you are missing out. Go get it. Go get it. Watch it. I'm sure it's streamable somewhere. Watch that thing. Fantastic. And number 2 in the countdown, I've got The Hobbit. But I'm talking about the 1977 Rankin and Bass animated film, The Hobbit. This movie got me started into fantasy, into sword and sorcery, and into Tolkien in a big way. I mean, when I first seen it, I was in grade school. They actually showed it on 16 millimeter in the auditorium. Don't know why, but they did. Not even sure how they got that, but they did. Must have been sixth grade, something like that. And then I've seen it many times after. And I've seen parts of it more recently, and I think it holds up. I really do. I know I've seen some very critical reviews of this on YouTube, and I don't understand what the problem is. I mean, yes, it's not 100% faithful, but neither is any other adaptation I've seen of anything Tolkien. You know, there are some liberties taken for sure, but I think the spirit is there. The music is great. The songs are all just so fantastically brought to life here. Great casting throughout. John Huston is Gandalf, for example. Great. I mean, yeah, if you haven't seen the Rankin and Bass Hobbit, check that out. I think it's the best adaptation of The Hobbit we've ever had, and that is not a super high bar. We haven't had many, but I really love it. It's not a perfect film, but I think it's pretty close in a lot of respects. Yeah, it's beautiful. My number 1 favorite fantasy film of all time. I'm sure you guys probably have predicted this by now, but it is the Lord of the Rings trilogy by Peter Jackson. Now, I'm not going to try to break out which one is the best. I'm just going to call it the Lord of the Rings trilogy by Peter Jackson. This came out between 2001 and 2003. And I think overall it is probably the greatest fantasy film of all time so far. Yeah, there's a few things I could quibble about. Again, there were some additions made that were not sourced from the books. And there's some things cut out that should have been included. So again, I kind of am scratching my head a little bit. I'm like, you added this character that didn't exist. You added this plot thing that never happened. You spent all this time over here, but then you don't include the Scourging of the Shire at the end. You just ignore that whole thing. You ignore Tom Bombadil. I don't know. There were some odd choices made, but overall, it's not perfect, but it's really, really spectacular. And there are some moments here, you know, that you're just gonna make you cry. You know, I mean, it did me, but yeah, it's very well done. Music is fantastic. Casting is great. I mean, I probably don't need to say much about this because I can't imagine many people haven't seen this by now that are into any of this kind of stuff. You know, comic books or fantasy or whatever. You know, then you know how great Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings was. So that is my number 1 favorite fantasy film of all time, the Lord of the Rings trilogy by Peter Jackson. So there you go. Now, you might look at this list and think, well, Larry, half of this stuff came out in the 80s. Well, that's true. There's two reasons for that. There's two primary reasons for that. One, I'm old, so that's what I was kind of growing up in the 80s, and I was probably seeing a lot more movies then than now. But it's not just an age thing. If you think about it, we're in a golden era in some ways of television, especially genre television, fantasy and superhero and sword and sorcery and all of that is happening with all these streaming services, and many of them are really good. Some are not so good, but I mean, so those items didn't make my list. So I'm watching more television, I think, as most people are, than I am movies. So I may have missed some great movies that might make this list because I'm watching so much TV. So that's how you explain that. I mean, if I was going to include TV shows, then probably the first, I guess, 3 seasons of Game of Thrones would probably be in here. The first 2 seasons of The Witcher would be in here. I thought those were fantastic. Just the first two. I won't talk about the third one, but you know, yeah, and there's probably many, many others that I'm leaving off here. So, but this was just strictly film, not television. So maybe I'll do another list with TV sometime. I don't know. Let me know if you want to see that. But hope you like this and subscribe if you haven't already. And I will see you next time.